I think we will start shortly here. The speakers, I will introduce you as soon as I am finished with the beginning of this press conference. I want to thank folks for coming today. I know that everyone is extremely busy. There has been this breaking news just in the last couple of days of the closing of the NVU Linden, NVU Johnson, and Randolph campus of Vermont Technical College. And it's brought up a lot of concern from folks all across the state. I know that legislators, probably trustee members of the state colleges, the governor and myself have been inundated with communications from concerned Vermonters across the spectrum, from students, faculty, staff, community members, businesses in the vicinity of the various facilities. Really the incredible importance of these institutions, particularly to the central and northeastern part of the state, but really to all Vermonters who attend our state college system and have access to the great programs of our state colleges throughout the state, and that the concern of these closing for the state is quite large. We are here today. It's very clear that the members of the legislative body, myself, the faculty, staff, and students are requesting that the Board of Trustees delay the vote to close the 3 facilities. The vote is scheduled for tomorrow, when everybody just learned about it on Friday. That is an extremely short window of time for the community to understand the reasons behind it, to come up with ideas and solutions to maintaining the facilities and continuing their operation. And it's obviously a very short window of time for people just to simply comprehend the radical change that would happen throughout the communities of Vermont that these facilities are located in and the general area that they're located in. Right now, so many are struggling with the impacts of COVID-19 and that pandemic, from all of us being isolated at home, to school being stopped, to businesses being shut down, and that there are huge financial consequences to the pandemic occurring, and that people's personal budgets and revenue streams are all severely impacted. We also know that the social and economic and community impacts of these institutions are very real. And so to impact the current climate with the COVID-19, with this on top of that, is a tremendously ill-timed conversation to be having, because this is going to be devastating for these communities. It's really going to go against all that we're trying to achieve. Closing these institutions will not help young people stay in Vermont and gain the knowledge and skills they need to stay in the state and thrive. This action will not attract young people to the state, which is a huge demographic that we were trying to grow the state with. And when you look back at so many businesses in Vermont, so many of our community members, farmers who are living in Vermont because they were attracted to Vermont by these institutions, this will be a tremendous loss for the state looking forward. This action will not expand businesses. It will not give them the opportunity to have interns or future employees. It will not create new businesses, which many graduates do. And this is going to hurt businesses across the spectrum and throughout Vermont by closing these institutions. Closing these institutions will hurt the workforce for Vermont going forward. It's not going to build the workforce. It's going to reduce the opportunity of workforce for our businesses in the state. So we do call on the board today to delay the vote on closing the campuses, to allow the legislature, community members, faculty, and students and businesses to work together to review the facts behind this proposal, and to review whether there's opportunities to be nimble and build a future that includes these facilities going forward in Vermont. We don't profess to know the answers at this time. This has been in front of us for just a couple of days now, but we need all the facts to come out, and we need time for that. There are tens of thousands of Vermonters and graduates of these institutions ready to put their ideas and resources to work to keep these institutions going and create the future that we want to have in Vermont. There's clearly got to be a more productive solution going forward. I know the legislators are taking this situation very seriously, and they have have had valuable proposals in the past. And we also recognize that the state has not been a very good partner in funding these institutions with annual budget appropriations. This has been an ongoing challenge for decades. And therefore, we all know we need to look at all of these issues in looking for a path forward. I would ask that the governor, who made a very good statement earlier today, which was an adjustment from Friday. I'm very glad that going from the adjustment Friday to today's statement that he no longer supports the proposal to close all 3 campuses. But I hope going forward, the governor would consider, in his very busy schedule right now, maybe appointing a task force with leaders from either past government leaders, business folks, students, faculty, staff, and community members to really dig into this over a number of weeks while the Board of Trustees gives a pause on their vote. The governor is obviously very busy with the COVID-19 pandemic. It'd be hard to think that he would have the time or the top level administrators would have the time right now. But if he could appoint a task force to look into this, I think that would be very, very helpful. With that statement, I would like to introduce Senator Kitchell from Caledonia County, who has a brief statement to offer regarding this proposal.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I won't repeat all the things the Lieutenant Governor said. It goes without saying, as someone who has lived in the Northeast Kingdom, and my family has for generations, and I have family members who attended the state college system, that this decision has really rocked us. During the last few days, we all have received hundreds of emails from parents, faculty, businesses, residents, and they all convey a very passionate view around the critical role that our state college system does play in meeting higher education and providing a higher education opportunities for our youth, but also meeting the workforce needs of our businesses. So as I heard the decision on Friday, it just struck me the impacts of the recommendations are so far-reaching, and that we all were taken back by just the magnitude of the proposal, and in the course of a weekend can't give the thoughtful response that people deserve and what people want. So time is needed, and the legislative leadership have asked for a delay, and I strongly agree. I think it just goes without saying that a lot of work has to be done. We can't be naive. The world of higher education has changed dramatically. We've got to do right-sizing. We've got to do future planning. We've got to look at emerging needs. But all that is important work to build the framework and the foundation for the future of our public higher education system. So I'm speaking as a legislator who will have a direct role in many of the discussions, but it needs to be done in a thoughtful way. I agree we need to have a work group with expertise to really help us figure out this path ahead, which is really so important to all Vermonters, but certainly the impact is experienced in the Northeast Kingdom and the central part of the state. So those are just my comments at this time, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. And next, we're going to hear from a Vermont student, State College student, Patrick Wickstrom, who has done a lot of work organizing. You could maybe tell us a little bit about the organizing and why briefly. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Lieutenant Governor. So I attend Northern Vermont University, Linden, and I can tell you, and I'm sure, you know, as you've said, all of your offices have been packed full with emails and phone calls, and that are from students and faculty, staff, community members, businesses from around the state with concerns about the Chancellor's plan to close all of Northern Vermont University and the VTC Randolph campus. And just to start, we have a Vermont State College Student Association, and we met today, and we have a student trustee that is on the Board of Trustees, Isabel Gagardi. And we met with her to bring up student concerns And she told us that she will be standing in solidarity with the students, and she will be releasing a statement today. And the VSCSA will also be holding an emergency meeting tonight to draft up a letter and a statement coming from the Vermont State College Student Association, which is comprised by all the student government bodies that are in the state college system. And I have to say that the petition launched and went further than I ever thought it would. We're standing at over 26,000 signatures. Our professors at our college are launching even further and doing protests on Monday before the Board of Trustees has a chance to meet. And the VSCS provides so much for the North, not only the Northeast economy, but the economy of Vermont as a whole. It brings young people like myself. I'm actually at home right now in Mansfield, Texas. And I study atmospheric sciences in Vermont because Linden was the right school for me. And the Vermont State Colleges provides a quality of education that I knew I would fall in love with and that I have fallen in love with. And that it makes such a big impact in these communities. Being, going from such an urban environment here to where I am at Linden and it being rural, I can see the impacts directly on how much this college and the colleges that, the state college system, these communities that they're in, has such a far-reaching impact. And without these colleges, these communities would struggle even further than COVID has already allowed them to. And these colleges are essential to the recovery of the Vermont state economy. And I just also wanted to share something. President Collins of Northern Vermont University actually just released an op-ed sent out to the students and faculty of our school with some facts behind our school itself and the finances. She has notified us that NVU is the only college in the Vermont State College system that has not borrowed from the system. And in fact, we have our own reserves as well. So this plan set forth by Chancellor Spalding is not based, it seems, on facts. And since he has not fully released the details of his plan, us as students, faculty, staff, community members, are unsure how we can trust that plan moving forward, especially whenever we're looking at the impacts that it will have, the far-reaching ones across the state of Vermont.
Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate that. And we will have room for questions for all of our speakers afterwards, but that's helpful information. Next, we're going to hear from Representative Dan Noyes, who does represent the district, including Johnson State. And I also know that we have Representative Hill here as well. I don't think he's going to be speaking, but he has joined us for this press conference. Representative Noyes.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Appreciate the invite to be here. It's such an important topic for our community. I graduated from Johnson in 1999. The college is so important to Lamoille County and the community of Johnson. I think it's an important part of our businesses, our community. It's just we need to make sure that it doesn't, it stays where it is. I think the big point that even Senator Kitchell made is that the legislature really hasn't had the opportunity to, look at the facts on this and address it and try to come up with some solutions to make sure that we can continue having Johnson in the community and NVU. I've been on the phone with the Speaker of the House, a number of the boards of trustees, many legislators over the past couple days, and just trying to make sure people understand how important this is and how we need to come up with some solutions to make sure that our NVU is solid in the community. So I appreciate the time and looking forward to seeing this through and hoping that they delay the vote on Monday.
Thank you, Representative Noyes. Next, we're going to have Senator Anthony Polina, who is a graduate of Johnson State, I believe, and also was involved in helping get a student board member on the Board of Trustees, as Patrick talked about lobbying that person before in the work she is now doing. Senator Polina, please join us.
Thank you, appreciate it. And yes, David, I am a graduate of Johnson State College. And as a legislator, I'm someone who's consistently offered legislative proposals to improve funding for our state colleges. And have never found the legislature open to pushing those proposals forward. Now I find myself, instead of improved funding, dealing with the situation. And it's almost hard to imagine that we're having a serious conversation about a proposal that's as bad as this one actually is. We know it's bad for our overall state economy, but it's going to be devastating also for the local communities where these institutions are based. We're talking about the loss of 500 or more jobs. We're talking about undermining our efforts to keep young people in the state of Vermont and attract more young people to the state of Vermont. We're talking about making college less accessible for Vermonters and realizing the kind of negative impact that'll have on those families. So, and this was, as Senator Kitchell said, there's a lot of different options to look at. We have to think creatively about how we want our state colleges to move forward and how we can best support them. But this proposal is clearly not the solution we were looking for by any means. It's a step backward. It's hard to imagine that we could go backwards from the lack of funding we've provided our colleges. We actually, in this proposal, find ourselves being told that we need to go further backwards in removing any support for the state colleges by removing them from our communities. The idea of doing this so quickly with so little public input is also completely unacceptable. I'm really glad that Vermonters are being heard, that people are raising their voices to make sure that they have a voice in what's going to happen to the state colleges. I think putting the decision off, at least until we have the opportunity to have a group of people, a task force or a commission, take a look at what the options are, is absolutely necessary. I also want to mention that, and I'm glad that the governor seems to have softened his position somewhat. But one of the things he said in his statement when he was looking at the options, one was to ask already overburdened taxpayers to pour tens of millions of dollars into these institutions. And I would just argue that we're not necessarily talking about already overtaxed taxpayers. What we're talking about is looking at reforms to the tax system that would allow us to raise the revenue we need to keep our colleges going. The enabling legislation for the state colleges says that they need to be supported wholly or in substantial part by the state government, by public dollars. That has not been the case. We've actually we've not kept up with our commitment to our state colleges. It's time that we do that, and we look for solutions that will really work and help us face the challenges our state colleges are facing.
Thank you, Senator Polina. I appreciate that. We do have another representative and senator, but we've also got a couple other important folks to hear from. Our next speaker is Kate Gold, the president of the Vermont State College United Professionals. Kate.
Thank you. And thank you to the amazing people who have shown up since this announcement was made. And I'd just like to say that this proposal unilaterally removes an economic engine from the campus's regions during this global crisis and economic hardship. We need time to respond to these challenges, and nobody's saying that they aren't considerable. But what we really need is time to work with our state legislators on a way to serve our communities. These closures are going to put more than 500 people out of work, and those dollars that the employees spend are going to be lost to the communities. I can't even imagine. So how many small businesses can survive this, and how many families are going to be affected? How many town budgets are going to be gutted? And how many more families who are already struggling because of the COVID effects are going to be struggling that much more? And we don't know because we haven't had time to find out, and we need that time. And the value to our local economies isn't measured only in dollars for the colleges. The students are footing the bill because we underfund our system, but the broader community is receiving benefits. Our libraries and recreational facilities and our arts programming, all of those are taken from families and residents. And we're talking pre-K to retirement who are up on our campuses using those and benefiting. And they're in some of the poorest areas of the state. So the students who are place-bound with family and farm and work commitments also would have no real option for higher ed beyond an associate's degree. And those options that we have, I live in the Northeast Kingdom, those options are largely online, and we don't have reliable internet access. I'm very lucky that I do usually, but that's not the case for many of the students I work with and many of my neighbors. This proposal was formed with so little input and absolutely no outside scrutiny, and just stealing their potential, and we can't support this. And please, we need time to do better than this.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate those remarks. And we have Representative Lucy Rogers from the Cambridge Waterville area also will be impacted by the Johnson State facility closing. Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, and thank you for your leadership in hosting this press conference. I hope that the Vermont State College's System Board of Trustees will hit the pause button and give all of us more time to think innovatively about how to transition to the next phase of the Vermont State College's system. Today, I attended the rally in Johnson and practiced my social distancing, of course. I was reminded while I was there of the incredible dedication, the boundless energy, and the creative minds that we are so fortunate to have in our rural communities. Any solution going forward must include local community leaders in the deliberation process and must ensure that there is a continuity of some form of higher education options throughout Lamoille County and the Northeast Kingdom, which I don't see in the Chancellor's current plan. For many of our local students, including those who live at home and commute, and those who access higher education as high school seniors, transferring to Castleton is simply not an option. The plan on the table would instead mean the end of higher education for so many of these students. I urge the Vermont State Colleges System Board of Trustees to delay their vote on closing the 3 Vermont State College campuses. I look forward to thinking creatively and innovatively about how to make sure our state college system is relevant into the 21st century. I'm heartened by the good news that came out today with the statements from the Speaker of the House, from the Pro Tem of the Senate, from the Governor, and with the Lieutenant Governor hosting this press conference. And it gives me hope that we may be able to proceed forward in a positive direction. But I also want to say to everybody that we are not by any means out of the woods yet. And please continue writing to the Governor, writing to the Board of Trustees, and perhaps even most importantly, writing to your friends in areas of the state that are less directly affected by the closure of these campuses. Because as we go forward, the legislature is going to have to work together as a whole to find solutions. And this means that we need buy-in from people from all over the state. So write to your friends in other parts of the state and ask them to talk to their legislators about how this is an issue that's important to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Rogers. I really appreciate that. Next, we're going to hear from Sandy Noyes, the VSEA president of the Staff Federation of the Vermont State Colleges.
Here I am. Excuse me. My name is Sandy Noyes, and I've been at Johnson for 27 years, which just proves the longevity of the people at these colleges. When students come onto campus, they know that we're going to be there for them. We're going to be there to help them, and they know where to go for help. So taking this away from them is going to be very hurtful to a lot of them. And something else I want to say is our college students, staff, and faculty shop locally. When they have visitors that come from families or whatever, they also shop locally. They dine in the restaurants, buy the gas, get their hair done. They're spending money left and right. And if they decide to close the colleges, we're going to do that too. I mean, we're going to lose that too. So, it was nice to hear people from Johnson graduates being there, and that's all I can say right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Really appreciate your voice on behalf of the staff at the different state colleges here. And finally, I think on the phone we have Senator Robert Starr, Bobby Starr, from the Northeast Kingdom as well. Senator Starr.
Yes, thank you, Dave, for holding this forum. You know, it was said back weeks ago by somebody, the cure is worse than the problem. And I think what the trustees have brought and the chancellor's brought before us is the cure that they're offering to straighten out the college system is far worse than the problems that we have today with them. And you know, I've lived in the Northeast Kingdom my entire life, graduated from Vermont Tech College, have, run a very success's business for 40 years. I've had many cousins, brothers, even my own son went to Johnson. It's going to be a terrible loss to our students that commute back and forth because many of them can't afford the board and room. It's going to be devastating to the communities in which these colleges are located, and being stuck up in the corner of the Northeast Kingdom next to the Canadian border. Everything we have is south of us, and I can't see any children or students from up here going to Castleton to finish their education. It's going to deprive many of our younger people a college education, which we've been promoting in the legislature for years, and it's disgraceful to our whole state. An issue as important as this is to give us 3 days notice that it's going to be voted on. And I just think that with the great minds in the the old statement, Vermont strong, well, we're too strong to take this sitting down, and there's no reason that if we put our heads together, we can't straighten this whole situation out and have excellent colleges for our young people in the future. So with that, again, Dave, thanks a lot, and I agree with all that's been said today.
Thank you, Senator Starr. I did get a written comment I'm going to add from Senator Benning, who was unable to join us. They've got some power outages up his way, but he did state for me to read, these colleges cannot simply be looked at as storefronts for profit. For well over a century, they have been an integral part of the community we call Vermont. They carry on the spirit and foresight of the authors of our Constitution, who, looking specifically into the future, put language in that document that demanded support for the education of our youth. These colleges do not simply educate those born here, they are the vehicles that attract youth from around the world to come to Vermont. Many stay and help Vermont grow. Many become Vermont's ambassadors throughout the world, helping perpetuate the cycle that makes Vermont healthy and diverse. Their students fill every business in Vermont's present economy. Their graduates create the very businesses keeping our economic engine running. We cannot abandon the legacy of our ancestors or hamstring our descendants with quick decisions in difficult times. We should remember our history before we become history and take the time to think this through. So in final closing, I want to just mention in the middle of the night when I was working in my barn with some pigs that were farrowing, I was thinking about dairy farmers throughout the northeast part of the state. And if some of them were able to work on their farms, but then attend daytime classes at these institutions, who now would have no possibility of doing so. There's no way you could do chores in the morning, get down to Castleton or one of the farther campuses, and then get back to do chores and help in the afternoon. There are other professions and other people working in situations where that's just not a possibility. And when I think about our agricultural future, the Vermont Technical College, VTC in Randolph, is really where the heart and soul of a lot of our agricultural education is centered for a lot of Vermonters. And so this planned closure or proposed closure for all of these facilities really will leave a hole in our community that will be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to fill for each of those different kinds of professions. I want to now open it up to questions from the media. This is our first time, so I'm going to work with it through the Zoom chat. And I think Rebecca Fleeter, if I pronounced your name right, if
yes,
you could go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. So if the board tomorrow refuses to delay the vote and instead chooses to go with Chancellor Spalding's initial plan, does the legislature or you, the lieutenant governor, or the governor have any power to help us? What are those next steps look like?
Well, I will partly answer this. I know Senator Polina, Senator Kitchell, and Senator Starr were on a call just on Friday where they discussed this a little bit because it's actually unclear. It seems as though the Board of Trustees has this authority, but at the same time, the state owns the facilities and has say over how the facilities are used. So there is some question in that regard. I don't know if any of the three senators have more input to answer, or representatives. And then I'll go to, it looks like Dom Amato and Rye and Steve have questions in order after that, but I'll call you.
So there is some confusion about who has the power to close the colleges. The legislative council lawyers tell us that one reading of the law is that the trustees do have the power to close the colleges, but on the other hand, as David said, the legislature is responsible for the physical sites. I think if they were to go ahead with a positive vote tomorrow, I think it certainly would not be enacted immediately. There would be time for the legislature to meet, to convene, and to, if necessary, pass legislation that's needed to allow the legislature to continue to have oversight of this process. You know, it's been our responsibility to try to fund the state colleges over the years. We have not done a very good job of it, but we've had that responsibility. So we should certainly have responsibility when it comes to the decision whether or not to close the colleges.
Thank you.
And I think, Mr. Amato, you've got the, oh, sorry, Bobby, did you have something you want to say?
Well, I didn't know if Jane was still on, but I know, you know, we do appropriate, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million a year, along with other monies that we appropriate to the state colleges. And I would just say that I think it would be a very difficult vote to continue to appropriate that kind of money to the CCV and in Castleton State. I know I sit on the Appropriations Committee, and I'd have a hard time supporting their budget in the future without our northern universities and VTC included in that package.
I think we'll continue to Dom, if you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I'm wondering why now? Why are lawmakers deciding to act now on the brink of closure for these schools? You know, we've heard from a few lawmakers today saying, oh, you know, no one has ever really fully agreed and we've never gotten a deal done. But now, as we face a vote in, you know, less than 24 hours, now all of a sudden there is this immense movement to try to make something happen. Is this what it had? Is this what it had to come to? Did it have to come to a decision by the chancellor to say, you know what, we're closing, for lawmakers to act? I'm not sure who can answer that question.
If any of my colleagues want to, I'm happy to have them come up as well. But I would say that.
Well, I'll jump in on that, Dave. You know, I think why didn't the trustees or the chancellor come to our legislature? We were there January, we were there February, we were there the first week in March before we had to leave because of COVID-19. Nobody knocked on our door that I know of in appropriations to come in and say, hey, you know, we've got a serious issue here with COVID-19. We need to sit down and chat with you. I must have missed that day or something, and I haven't missed a day in years. I mean, from the legislature. So, you know, if you don't hear from these people, it's pretty hard to help them.
This also hasn't been a secret, though, that the Vermont state colleges have been struggling. Like was mentioned, this has been a decades-long problem. So I guess I'm just wondering why lawmakers haven't been able to make something happen over the last decades, as important as these schools are.
Well, as you know, there's been a lot of resistance to raising revenue put towards a lot of needs in the state of Vermont. In recent years, we've had this kind of no tax policy for the last really couple of decades. So it's gotten pretty extreme in the last couple of years. So the colleges have come in over time. And like I said, I've introduced legislation repeatedly that would improve funding for the state colleges. And basically that has not been accepted. So I think what's happening is, like, you know, we're finally seeing what's the result of the neglect we've done over the years. when in fact now we're saying not only have we have a lack of support, but they're no longer able to stay in business. So I think it's a wake-up call for legislators, quite honestly, for some legislators. And it's a wake-up call that says, if you want quality higher education, you got to be willing to find a way to pay for it. And I don't accept the fact that we can't afford to pay for it. We just have to make it a priority and realize how important it is economically and socially and culturally to the state of Vermont to raise that revenue to pay for it. And I do know that there are ways in which we can reform our tax system to make it more fair, to raise additional revenue that could go towards funding our state colleges. We've just been resistant to do that because we've had this no tax thing going on over the recent years. Hopefully that'll come to an end and we'll find ways to raise revenue to support the state college. It's better now, better late than never. Yes.
David, this is Jane Kitchell.
Sure.
First of all, I would like to say that the legislature has provided additional funding. The chancellor has requested it. He has indicated on several times that the additional money would be what was needed. The legislature put in additional funding when the whole proposal to create the NBU structure was put forward. That was several millions of dollars to support that. So I would say that there has been multiple increases that were done to recognize the financial situation. Several times we were told that that appropriation would stabilize and take care of the situation. That doesn't mean that the funding isn't at the level that would be desired, but I simply want to say that there have been increases made. I will also say, because there's been confusion about this and the federal COVID money is coming in, that some goes directly to higher ed and some comes directly to the state. The appropriations folks are well aware that there are short-term funding needs of the state college because of the room and board repayment and other costs associated, and that people have been under the impression that we have made a decision not to provide any help, and I want to take this opportunity to say that is absolutely not the case. We know that we have to look at that short term so the system can pay its bills, but also if that funding, depending on how it can, we will look at it as it helps us address the longer term, but that transition period. So I just want to make it clear that there have been additional requests, there have been affirmative responses, and even now in the COVID crisis, we know that there's additional need over and above the appropriation, and we are committed to addressing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Senators. We've got Rye Pinkney, and if you can just let us know who you're reporting from as well when you introduce your question, please.
Hi, I'm a Johnson Online student, and I had kind of a question and a concern. I've gotten dozens of emails from various different people, from like students, from faculty, from my advisor, and it was inconsistent what was closing. Some email said it was just, I think, everything but Castleton, and everyone was transferring to Castleton, and then some of them were saying everything's closing. I wasn't sure what the actual case was. It sounds like everyone's transferring to Castleton, and what does it mean for seniors and for online students?
Thank you, Rye. I appreciate that question, and we'll try to answer that. I also let people know that this is a press conference primarily, and a lot of other folks have got in because the link was put out there, and that's a good question for clarity for folks, so thank you. My understanding, it's the three campuses of NVU Johnson, NVU Linden, and Vermont Technical College. It is not the complete state college system that is being shut down other than Castleton. I think CCV campuses would stay open as well. But if anybody else, Jane, looks like you might have knowledge on this? Or?
Yes, the Williston campus of VTC would remain open. that's as proposed, but please remember, we're asking for a delay of that decision. So if in fact that happens and we come up with an alternative plan, then things could change. But right now it's the Randolph campus that would be closed and the Williston one would remain open.
David, this is Mike Donahue. Can you hear me?
I can. Mike, there were some other people in queue, but now I know you've...
I just got an email saying they have postponed the vote tomorrow.
Well, all right, everybody. Look at that.
I thought...
Well, it's good to have a little good news.
I just got a press release from, it says the Vermont State College System Board of Trustees Chairman J. Churchill Hines announced today that Monday's meeting of the board will be informational in nature. The board does not plan to vote on recent transformational changes at that time. Some background quote, I have listened to my colleagues on the board and want to give them time to consider the very significant decisions we have to make, unquote, said Hines, but delayed action increases the profound financial risks facing all four VSCS's, colleges and universities. Those risks grow daily. We simply do not have the funds to afford a protracted discussion and debate. So there's several paragraphs to this thing, but the bottom line is there won't be a vote tomorrow by the sounds of it.
Well, that's Bob, I can't get in here. I think there we go. That's obviously, I think, good news for both what everybody on this call was seeking that I know of, unless there was someone who's watching that had a different idea than the rest of us. I do want to offer the opportunity for those that were in line for questions, if there were other questions you wanted to ask, and Steve Cormier was next from WDEV, and I think there are one or two other questions that will still allow to happen, and then we'll figure out where to go from here.
Scoop Donahue does it again. It's amazing. Nice job, Mike. I do want to piggyback a little bit off of Mike's statement there. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to read something real quick from Tim Ash and Bitsy Johnson's press release, and they're talking about a work group. My question is, I guess it's twofold, and I can hear what the chair is saying, time is ticking here, is that there's going to have to be funding put up pretty quickly. How long would you expect this work group to go? Because it looks like Senator Ash and Speaker Johnson are saying that they want to keep all three campuses operational 2020 through 2021. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, David.
Well, I'll answer, and I know Senator Kitchell, I think, also has something she'd like to say, being that she's chair of appropriations. I saw that notice from the speaker and the president pro tem earlier today as well, and I was pleased with the timeline they had put out, because I originally was simply saying we need a few weeks to a month for people to at least figure out what's going on. If the legislative leadership is stating that they think the resources are there to keep these institutions open for a year and through the next spring, that's a pretty tremendous ask and level of support on their part, and I'm pleased for that. But I imagine that also puts Senator Kitchell and the Budget Appropriations Committee in a tight spot, given the circumstances the state is facing. So I don't know if Senator Kitchell would like to add anything if she's aware of their position.
Am I still, I'm not muted, is that right?
Correct.
Oh, okay. That goes back to my earlier comment. Our hope is that we can, with the COVID money coming in, the federal money, because this is just, hopefully we can say that the situation we're in has been created by the pandemic, is that we would provide the short-term funding that is needed just to finish this fiscal year, because that involves payments of room and board back to students and so forth, and look at allocating money, if at all permissible, which our thinking is that it would be, of money to support this transition year. So that is our hope. That would be what we would attempt to clarify to make sure that that would be a permissible use, but we think that that would be a more orderly and thoughtful way so that we deal with that short-term paying our bills right now and funding a path to really define the future of the system.
I'm going to go to Alexandra Huff, who had a couple questions. If you can make them together, and we'll try and get them answered quickly. We're not going to run this on forever. I know there's another parent that had a question. This was oriented as a press conference, but I do want to be able to answer folks' questions. We may take some of them over to the Facebook page and through my office at a later time. Alexandra, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, hi. I am a, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I am a student reporter for The Critic, the newspaper on the NVU Linden campus. And I was just wondering, to the legislature's knowledge, has a formal additional funding request from the Vermont State College system due to COVID-19 been made? There's been talk back and forth, but nobody knows for certain, and how much was requested. And on top of that, we've heard from many senators and representatives and government officials today and got different aspects on that. And I was just wondering if student Patrick Wickstrom could expand on student concerns at this time with a handful of questions or solutions that the young people, these 19, 20-year-olds are offering, so that we can get more of that perspective.
Well, this is Jane Kitchell again. We do not have a firm number. Some of that still needs to be developed, but in all honesty, to repay the room and board, we've heard an estimate of around $5 to $6 million with some other costs. We are probably in the vicinity of $10 million. I hope that's helpful, and that's what's needed immediately.
Lieutenant Governor, can you hear me?
John, I can, and I've now learned that you and Lola from Vermont Digger were sending some questions through my phone, so I was going to go to you two next. I do want to answer one other quick question. Someone asked, where is the VTC representation? I did reach out to Senator McDonald, and I could not get through to him this morning. I also did speak with Representative Jay Hooper, and he was very pleased that this conversation was happening, but also recognized we had a lot of people on the call as actual speakers. And so I believe he may be watching on FaceTime Live. I'm not certain, but they are certainly very concerned as well. So I can answer that question. But John, why don't you go ahead and ask yours, and then I'll ask Lola's question, and then we'll go back to the group chat.
Okay, for years there's been talk about closing one or the other, Johnson or Linden. Has it occurred to any of you that this could be kind of a bargaining opener? We'll threaten to close both of them, making closing only one of them politically more palatable. Have you thought that this is possibly what's in the minds of the people at the chancellor's office? And if so, what would you think of that? Do you think it may be necessary to close one of these campuses?
Well, I would start by saying that I would hope that that isn't the cynical approach that is being taken, but I cannot speak for the chancellor or the board. I have to take their actions at their word. I do think what this will allow for is everyone to recognize the importance of all three of these institutions, but also the importance of the management of the institutions to work to make them maybe a little more nimble and flexible with respect to shifting some of their programs to the programs where we need more people, nursing programs and others in Vermont. I see that Senator Kitchell also may want to add something to that answer.
Yeah, good.
I think that's going to be the challenge, and if we have that work group or whatever commission, is to really help us sort out where is the need, because we've had discussion around the need to increase capacity for nursing. The other area that we passed, for example, was legislation to create a dental therapist profession, which would be needed to help address our shortage of dental practitioners. That was passed 5 or 6 years ago, and the program has yet to be put in place. We've heard information around expanding that recreational administration component. So the challenge is, are there ways in which we can design programs that are have a niche, have attractiveness? Where should they be located? What should the system do? And to me, that is the kind of analysis that should then ultimately drive decisions around how, which site provides what kind of educational opportunity or specializes, and the other, of course, is looking at within our high schools, the way in which our state college system can support some of those educational opportunities, which in reality, some of our schools in Vermont are using Southern New Hampshire University resources. So we need to make sure that we have a system that understands the workplace needs, what the programs are, where the students are, and how we can develop those programs to be responsive that way. So to me, that's part of the work that has to be undertaken. We also have to right-size our facilities. We know that we've got empty dorm rooms and dorms, and how properties could be used in multiple ways. So that it's a heavy lift. There's a lot of work.
Can I?
Go ahead, Representative Rogers.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely want to echo everything Senator Kitchell just said, and I think in addition, just to say that I think this idea that we can close 3 campuses and then the whole rest of the system is completely financially sustainable as is an idea that we should be moving away from, because I think really the root of the problem is that we have a 20th century higher education system and we're in the 21st century. And so really, and hopefully if we were able to have a task force and involvement with community leaders in the affected communities, we would be able to come up with more creative solutions. But it's really not even just about the 3 campuses that are being discussed. It's about the entire Vermont State Colleges system, and how do we create a model that is caught up with our times and financially sustainable into the 21st century and serves all geographic regions of Vermont. So I really think that's the question we should be asking and thinking about.
Thank you, Representative. We have, just for people's awareness of order, I've got Lola from Digger, and then Mike Verillo from the Stowe Reporter. And after that, John Walters has put in a question. I know there's a couple more in the Zoom chat as well. I just wanted to put out the order that I'm going to be going next. Lola's question from Digger was, given that Vermont funds higher education at a lesser rate than every other state in the country, how can lawmakers credibly say they have been responsive to the system's financial needs? I think in part, Senator Kitchell did answer that, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Senator Kitchell.
No, I don't. I've stated what we have done. I know that people would say it should be more, and therefore tuition would not be higher. It gets into, once again, you have finite revenues unless we want to go for taxes. And so that gets into that very difficult discussion around what do we fund, how are we funding it. I know that there's been obviously concern about the level of funding. We're tied with New Hampshire, if you want to know the truth. And so this may force some discussion around the funding level in what is a very difficult fiscal reality. So it's a matter of, if you don't want to raise taxes, then how do you want to redistribute what you're spending that you have now? And I have to say, generally people come to me wanting more for their particular area. I don't hear people saying we should take money from here and take it away. So those are tough choices, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of a zero-sum game.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell.
And
Patrick, did you have a talk?
Lieutenant Governor, sorry, Tom Garris here from NBC5. I had tried to throw in a message in the chat there about a question, but it doesn't look like it's going through. So could you just put me on the list?
Yep, you got it. Okay, Patrick, go ahead. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. So back to something that Senator Kitchell mentioned is whenever it comes to us going to the legislature and asking for money, and that there's only a set amount that they can really pull from, it kind of, one of the student concerns that came up was the way that we distribute money from state revenue to us, UVM, and I believe it's VSAC. And seeing that the Vermont State Colleges serves more Vermonters in state than any other college system, and we're getting pretty much the same as UVM in terms of state support. That was one of the student concerns that was brought up, is that the Vermont State Colleges serves more Vermonters, therefore it should serve as getting more state appropriations than any of the other systems.
Well, let me first state that the appropriation to the University of Vermont has to fund three different functions. One is the medical school, which is the only one in Vermont. The other is the extension service that provides services to and have services out around the state. And the third is to provide financial assistance for Vermont students. So their appropriation is somewhat unique in that there are two discrete activities that are undertaken by the university that are other than the traditional support. The other gets into a big discussion that's been, and that is our Vermont Student Assistance money to provide financial assistance to students. There have been suggestions that financial aid should be limited to institutions in Vermont. Other people who are very familiar with the origins of VSAC have said they view it as a form of social justice, that if a student wanted to go to a particular program or got accepted into the college of their choice or whatever, that portability was important to assure the same access to those educational opportunities as any other Vermont student whose family has more money. So you've touched on long policy discussions that are out there. They could be revisited, but that's why the university's appropriation is unique in that regard, and that is the policy basis for the VSAC funding. So that, I hope, is helpful.
Thank you, Patrick and Senator Kitchell. Mike Varillo, and then John Walters, and then we'll be to you, Tom. And I think there's one or two others. I am sticking with this because we have over 600 people on the FaceTime watching this as well. So I think people are still interested in these questions and answers, but we will start to wrap up. But in any case, Mike?
Yeah, it's Mike Varillo from the Star Reporter and News and Citizen. As Dom Amato kind of pointed out, this has been around, this kind of situation has been around for a while. People have known that this school system's been in a pretty tough situation. And since the news kind of surfaced Friday that there would be this recommendation to close these two schools, I've heard a lot about the devastating economic impact that this would have. I'm curious, in previous funding or previous allocation, how much that economic impact has been taken into consideration, and whether this working group is going to properly weigh that and try to figure out if it would actually cost more to close these schools down.
I think that the joint statement from the Speaker and the Pro Tem addressed that as a need to be examined. I know that there are probably colleagues in the legislature who have thoughts on that, because in fact down in southwestern Vermont there have been I think maybe 4 or 5 colleges that have closed, and so obviously there is some experience with the economic impact as well. And those are areas that, from an economic perspective, have really languished over the since the recession. But I think that is part of taking a comprehensive look in terms of what are the economic impacts, both associated with a closure, but also associated with the operation of the program. So I can't answer that right now. I think that is an area that is important in looking at decisions in a much more holistic way.
Next, I think we have the John Walters question. And we've partly discussed this, but there may be further comment, but we'll keep it brief. Short-term funding is one thing, but this crisis will have long-lasting effects, and we have consistently been near the bottom in funding of higher education. The result is a fragile system that can't sustain during a crisis. Don't we need to commit adequate investment to create a system that's robust and affordable? I will say, before Senator Kitchell or Polina get on, because I think they've both talked about this in some respects, there are many, many competing interests in the state budget. There's been discussion of trying to have more robust funding for our state colleges and higher education. And as I was on a call earlier today, folks were saying, well, we found money for clean water. What about the state colleges? And I said, we shouldn't be pitting our important needs against each other, but that's what happens in the Appropriations Committee. There are often more realistically important things to be funded than the state currently has the revenues for. And I remember when I was first in the legislature, a legislator said to me, the most important committee is actually not appropriations. It's Ways and Means and Finance, because appropriations can only spend as much money as the state raises through its tax system. And then everybody's competing for those resources. And I think Senator Polina addressed that in some respects of how can we either restructure our tax system so that those who have more put more in, and then the resources would also be available so that the boiling frog syndrome would not occur, because this has been a sort of death by 1,000 small increases as opposed to cuts maybe, but cuts relative to the cost of running these institutions. I don't know if Anthony wants to add any more to that.
Well, yes, I would. Even though we have a lot of debates about education funding and nobody likes taxes, you could argue, Vermonters have been very supportive over the years of K through 12 education, consistently passing school budgets, even in controversial issues and even in hard times. I think one of the things we have to do is start looking at education as not K through 12 being public education, but K through 16 being public education, because of the growing importance of college degrees. So I think if we looked at higher education as part of the public educational system, we would be able to think about ways to raise the revenue to support that whole system and not separate out higher education as something special that we repeatedly underfund. It should be seen as part of the system that we have to fund adequately. And just as an aside, we do know also that when it comes to funding public education, K through 12, that higher income people pay a smaller percentage of their income to fund those schools than do lower income people. If we take a look at that system and how it works, I think we can make it more fair. We could ask people to pay their fair share, and we could raise the revenue we need to support higher education along with K through 12 education. So I think we have to see it as one whole system that goes from cradle to career, as the governor likes to say. And I think that would help us better understand how to deal with the funding issues.
Jane, unless you have something else to add, we'll go to the next question.
No, go to the next question.
I think Tom had chimed in. You're up, Tom Garris.
Yeah, Lieutenant Governor, thank you. We've gotten emails from a couple of different groups today. It looks like professors and alumni from NVU and calling, in a vote of no confidence. Do you think that the chancellor should step down over this proposal?
Well, I would just say that I don't have enough information yet to make that determination. All of this is so new. I certainly think that putting out this level of change in the institution, I see you, Patrick, and putting out this level of change to what is so fundamentally important to the people of Vermont and the opportunities for Vermont without more notice and warning and information is not the way we would like to see things happen in Vermont. We typically are very transparent and talk about issues so that everybody can give involvement and come up with ideas and come up with solutions. And Vermonters typically will pitch in to make those solutions possible. So this was not the way that I would like to see things happen, but I'm not yet going to say that a vote for or against no confidence should be cast. I think Patrick, who's one of our speakers, would like to say something.
Yeah, going along with that, I know this idea has floated around along with the vote of no confidence. Do you think it would be appropriate to have a potential investigation in the management of the Vermont State College system and how it has handled its funds, especially seeing that the faculty and staff at some of the colleges and universities have put in votes of no confidence and called for the chancellor to step down? Do you think that would be something to be explored or be appropriate?
Well, Patrick, I thought you were a speaker, not a reporter, but you know, I think the legislature will be having a lot of these conversations. There are 4 legislators on the board. The legislature, which obviously appropriates a significant portion, even though it's still a very small portion, it's still a significant number of dollars. We'll have to dig into this and make that kind of decision. But again, just like I said before, I'd like to analyze a lot more of what happened over the last year before absolutely calling for an up or down vote, just as we right now are responding to this new information. I think it's, we have a tradition in Vermont of taking our time to really analyze things, and that's what I'm going to be going with. Senator Kitchell, did you indicate you wanted to speak, or was that just a noise in the background? Okay. I believe most of the reporters' questions, Lauren Cornell is got part of us. Are you part of the student paper?
No, I'm actually, so Northern Vermont University Linden has its own student-run news station, News 7. So great. I'm here reporting for them today.
Great.
And I just have a question about how we were discussing potentially having a group of individuals working and trying to figure out what we can do with the financial situation that we're currently in. So with this proposal to convene a working group to come up with recommendations, how would you suggest that working group be formed, and who do you think needs to be on it?
Well, ultimately, such a group would be either determined by the governor in an independent action through executive order or through the legislature in legislation to do so. Those would be the 2 avenues to do such an action. And as far as who would be on it, I think we need a diverse group of both past political leaders. I was thinking about potentially having the governor ask former Governor Douglas or former Governor Shumlin or both, as well as some from the academic faculty union and the staff union and a student representative, some folks from the business community, just so that we have a diverse range of people, and even potentially some from the funding or philanthropic communities to really look at what all the possibilities might be. Again, I saw Senator Kitchell's light up, so I don't know if she had additional piece to that or if that was just a noise in the background.
No, I didn't have a comment. I think that has to be determined, and you need to get the right blend of feedback and also expertise and diversity of knowledge. So I think that those decisions around selection need to be done with consideration, and we are not in this environment, and we haven't reached that point by any stretch.
And I'm just realizing there's a number of more down the line, but I do think we're going to wrap up. What I'd like to say is anybody who has a question that they either didn't get answered, particularly if it's just a factual question that we're looking for answers to, please feel free to email my office at deb.wolf@vermont.gov. That's DEB.WOLF @vermont.gov. It might take us a couple days. She's my chief of staff of 1, and she has been working all weekend as everybody else has. And I think everybody if we've got this delay, maybe having a day to breathe, I think everybody could stand to use that right now. Although breathe safely and healthily and in distance from other people. I want to thank all of our participants who were the speakers on this conversation. Like I said, I think we had over 700 people also watching this, so I think the state interest was quite significant. I want to thank Bob Farnham for helping all the facilitation of the technology, because that is beyond my bandwidth. And thank all of the senators, representatives, and the representatives of the faculty, staff, and student bodies who are a part of this press conference as well. And ultimately say congratulations for the incredible organizing and work that so many have done to build that pressure that the legislature clearly heard with leadership of Speaker Tim Ash and, Pro Tem Tim Ash and Speaker Johnson. The governor as well heard it and made his announcement today. And so this does go to show that when folks get involved and speak out, action gets taken and it is heard. So I think that's also important to recognize today. So thank you for attending, and we will sign off.